My name is Eileen, and I'm 62 years old. When my son Joshua married last year, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I kept my $75 million fortune a complete secret. After building a tech security empire with my late husband David, I wanted to see who would value me for who I am, not what I owned. A week after the wedding, my new daughter-in-law Meredith openly mocked me for being poor in front of her wealthy friends. She had absolutely no idea who she was really talking to. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to deal with someone who judged you before knowing your full story. Trust me, what happens next in my journey will make you think twice about first impressions. I was born and raised in a small coastal town in Maine, where life was simple but fulfilling. My parents owned a small bookstore that barely kept us afloat financially, but our home was rich with love and learning. From an early age, I was taught that a person's character mattered far more than their possessions. Those humble beginnings shaped who I would become, though I never imagined the path my life would eventually take. I met David during my second year at the state university. I was working 3 jobs to pay for my computer science degree while he was the brilliant scholarship kid everyone talked about. David came from an even more modest background than mine. Raised by a single mother in a struggling neighborhood in Boston, he had fought his way to college through sheer determination and extraordinary intelligence. You're the only person in that advanced programming class who doesn't look at me like I'm speaking a foreign language, he said the first time we studied together in the library. His smile was warm, slightly crooked, and completely charming. We became inseparable, 2 ambitious outsiders who shared not only a passion for technology, but also a deep-rooted belief that success should be earned, not handed to you. After graduation, while our classmates took prestigious jobs at established tech companies, David had a different vision. "The world is changing, Eileen," he told me one night as we sat on the floor of our tiny, rented apartment, surrounded by computer parts and empty pizza boxes. "Everything is going digital, and nobody's thinking about security. That's where the real need will be." This was 1985, long before most people even owned personal computers. But David had an uncanny ability to see around corners. With $5,000 saved from odd jobs and a loan from my reluctant parents, we started Williams Security Systems from our garage. The company name was simple, just David's last name, which became mine when we married a year later. Those early years were brutally difficult. We worked 18-hour days, often sleeping under our desks. There were months when we couldn't pay ourselves salaries, weeks when we survived on ramen noodles and coffee. But David's revolutionary security algorithm caught the attention of several small banks concerned about the emerging digital threats, and slowly, our client list grew. "We just need one big break," David would say, whenever I felt discouraged. That break came in 1992, when a major credit card company experienced a security breach that our software could have prevented. Suddenly, everyone in the financial industry wanted what we had created. Within 2 years, we moved from our garage to a proper office building with 15 employees. 5 years later, we had over 200 employees and had expanded into government contracts. Through it all, we maintained a relatively modest lifestyle. Yes, we moved from our tiny apartment to a comfortable 4-bedroom house in a nice suburb of Boston, but it wasn't a mansion. We drove reliable cars rather than luxury vehicles. We took vacations, but nothing extravagant. The bulk of our growing wealth was reinvested in the company or saved for the future. When Joshua was born in 1989, in the midst of our company's early struggles, we made a conscious decision about how we would raise him. "I don't want him to grow up entitled," I told David as we watched our newborn son sleeping in his secondhand crib. "I want him to understand the value of work just like we do." David agreed wholeheartedly. "Money changes people, especially kids who grow up with it. Let's make sure it doesn't change our son." As Joshua grew, we were careful about how we presented our increasing wealth. His clothes were nice, but not designer. He attended a good public school rather than an elite private institution. He had chores and a modest allowance that increased only when he demonstrated responsibility. When he wanted something expensive, we made him work for part of it. "But Tommy's parents just bought him the new Nintendo," 10-year-old Joshua complained once, "and we're happy to contribute half the cost," David explained patiently. "But you'll need to save up the other half from your allowance and extra chores." By the time Joshua was a teenager, our company had grown into an industry leader, with offices across the country. We had moved once more to a larger home with a pool, our one real indulgence. But it was still far from ostentatious compared to what we could afford. Only a small circle of close friends and advisors knew the true extent of our wealth. Joshua grew into a thoughtful, hard-working young man. To our slight surprise, he showed little interest in technology or joining the family business. Instead, he developed a passion for law and social justice. "I think I can help more people as a lawyer than as a tech executive," he explained when applying to law schools. We supported his decision, completely proud that he wanted to forge his own path, rather than simply step into what we had built. When Joshua was 28, our lives were upended. David, who had always seemed invincible to me, suffered a massive heart attack while jogging. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. At 58, I found myself a widow with a multinational corporation to run and a personal fortune that had grown beyond anything we could have imagined when we started in that garage. Grief nearly swallowed me whole. David hadn't just been my husband. He'd been my business partner, my best friend, my other half for over 30 years. Joshua flew home immediately from New York, where he had established himself at a prestigious law firm specializing in nonprofit work. "Mom, you don't have to handle everything alone," he said, as we sat together after the funeral, the house eerily quiet, without David's booming laugh and constant energy. But in truth, I did have to handle it, at least initially. As CEO and majority shareholder, I had responsibilities that couldn't wait for grief to subside. For 2 years, I threw myself into work, ensuring the company remained strong, while privately feeling like I was merely going through the motions of living. Eventually, I made the decision to step back from day-to-day operations. I remained the majority shareholder and chairwoman of the board, but appointed our longtime COO as the new CEO. With more time on my hands, I focused on establishing the David Williams Foundation, dedicated to providing technology education to underprivileged children. Throughout these changes, I maintained the modest lifestyle David and I had always embraced. I still lived in our family home, still drove the same car, though I did upgrade to a newer model of the same brand, still shopped at the same stores. Wealth had never defined me, and I saw no reason to change that after David's death. Joshua knew we were well off, of course. He'd grown up watching the company expand. He'd attended board meetings during school breaks and summer vacations. He understood that I had investments and that the company was valuable. But we had never discussed specific numbers, and he had never asked. Money simply wasn't central to our relationship or conversations. When he called me 5 years after his father's death, his voice unusually animated, I knew something significant had happened. "Mom, I've met someone," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Her name is Meredith, and she's amazing. I really want you to meet her." My heart lightened instantly. Joshua had dated occasionally over the years, but no one had ever prompted this level of enthusiasm. At 34, he was established in his career, mature, and knew what he wanted in a partner. "I'd love to meet her," I replied, already mentally planning a visit to New York. "Tell me everything about her." Meredith Calloway, I learned, was 29, a communications director for a luxury fashion brand, and according to my son, brilliant, beautiful, and passionate about her work. They had met at a charity gala where Joshua's firm was being honored for its pro bono work. What followed was a whirlwind romance that had culminated in this phone call. What I didn't know then was that this meeting would set in motion a series of events that would test not only my patience, but also my deeply held beliefs about wealth, respect, and human nature. Sometimes, the most valuable lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. I first met Meredith 3 months after Joshua's phone call, when they invited me to New York for a weekend visit. I booked a modest hotel room despite Joshua's insistence that I stay in his apartment. "I don't want to intrude on your space," I told him. "This way, you two can have privacy, and I can retreat when I need to." The truth was, I wanted to observe their dynamic without being constantly present. Meeting the woman your only child loves is a delicate dance. You want to be supportive, while also making sure they've chosen someone worthy of them. Meredith was physically striking, tall and slender, with perfectly styled blonde hair, flawless makeup, and a designer outfit that I recognized as expensive only because I'd seen it in a magazine. Her handshake was firm, her smile practiced but pleasant. "Joshua has told me so much about you, Mrs. Williams," she said as we sat down for dinner at an upscale restaurant she had selected. "It's wonderful to finally meet the woman who raised such an amazing man." "Please call me Eileen," I replied, noting how her eyes briefly scanned my simple blazer and pants. Nice quality, but certainly not designer. "And I'm delighted to meet the woman who's made my son so happy." Throughout dinner, Meredith was unfailingly polite, asking appropriate questions about my life in Boston, my volunteer work, and my interests. Yet, something felt calculated about her warmth, as if she were following an internal script for impressing the boyfriend's mother. I noticed other things too. How her eyes lit up when she mentioned her recent promotion, the raise that came with it, and the designer purse she'd bought to celebrate. How she casually dropped names of celebrities her company dressed. How she seemed to steer the conversation toward material markers of success. Neighborhoods, restaurants, brands. "Mom still lives in the house where I grew up," Joshua explained when Meredith asked about my living situation. "Oh," Meredith replied with a slight furrow in her brow, as if trying to reconcile this with some preconceived notion. "That must be comforting. So much stability." "It's home," I said simply, filled with memories of Joshua's father and our life together. Some things are worth more than their market value. A flicker of something, confusion, dismissal, crossed her face before she smiled again. "Of course, sentiment is important too." The weekend continued in much the same vein. Meredith was never outright rude, but there was an underlying current of assessment in her interactions with me. When she suggested Sunday brunch at an exclusive restaurant where they make the most divine mimosas, though they're $40 each, I caught a glance between her and Joshua. Him slightly embarrassed her, oblivious to his discomfort. On my last evening, while Joshua was taking a work call, Meredith and I had our first moment alone in their apartment. "You've raised such a wonderful man," she said, swirling an expensive wine in her glass. "His firm is very well respected." "Thank you," I replied. "I'm incredibly proud of him. He works hard and truly cares about his clients." He mentioned his father started some kind of tech company. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were keen with interest. "Yes, Williams Security Systems. We founded it together, actually." "Oh, you work too?" She seemed genuinely surprised. "What did you do there?" "A bit of everything in the early days," I said, deliberately vague. "Later, I handled more of the operational side, while David focused on product development." "And you sold it after he passed away," she pressed. "No, the company is still operating. I'm just not involved in day-to-day management anymore." Meredith nodded, but I could almost see her recalculating something in her mind. I'd noticed throughout the weekend that she seemed to be trying to reconcile my modest appearance and lifestyle with her perception of what a successful tech company founder should look like. Since I didn't match that image, she appeared to have concluded that the company must have been small or unsuccessful. 5 months after this first meeting, Joshua called with news that both thrilled and concerned me. "We're engaged, Mom," he announced, his voice a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I proposed last night at the rooftop restaurant where we had our first date. She said yes." "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said, genuinely happy to hear such joy in his voice. "Have you set a date yet?" "Meredith wants a summer wedding, so we're thinking next June. But Mom, there's something else." He hesitated. "She has some pretty specific ideas about the wedding. It's going to be, well, elaborate." Over the next 20 minutes, Joshua outlined what sounded less like a wedding and more like a society event designed to impress. A historic estate in the Hamptons, at least 200 guests, a designer gown, celebrity photographer, gourmet catering, live band plus DJ. Estimated cost just under $200,000. "Meredith's parents are contributing some," he added quickly, "but they're expecting us to cover most of it, since they think what, Joshua?" I asked gently. "Since they think I come from money," he admitted. "I've never discussed our finances specifically, but Meredith assumed, given my education and career, that my family is wealthy, and her parents own a successful real estate development company, so they are used to a certain lifestyle." This was the first real red flag. Not the expensive wedding itself. People were entitled to celebrate however they wished, but the assumptions and expectations underlying it. "Joshua," I said carefully, "what exactly have you told Meredith about our family's financial situation?" "Not much," he confessed. "She knows Dad founded a security company and that you worked there too. She knows I grew up comfortably, but I've never discussed details or numbers." "And what do you want me to contribute to this wedding?" He named a figure that, while easily within my means, was substantial. "I know it's a lot, Mom, but this means everything to Meredith." After a thoughtful pause, I made a suggestion that would change everything. "What if we don't correct her assumptions right now?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we let Meredith and her family continue to believe that I'm just a modestly comfortable widow, that the company was successful enough to provide a good living, but nothing extraordinary?" "But why would we do that?" Joshua sounded confused. "Because I want to know who Meredith really is Joshua. I want to see how she treats people she doesn't think can benefit her financially. I want to make sure she loves you for you, not for what she thinks comes with you." There was a long silence before Joshua spoke again. "You think she's marrying me for money that she doesn't even know I have? I think that character reveals itself when people believe no one is watching or when there's nothing to gain," I said gently. "Let's see how she treats a mother-in-law she believes is of modest means. Let's see if she respects you for your work and character, not your potential inheritance. And if she doesn't," his voice was quiet now, "then you'll have learned something important before you legally bind your life to hers. But if she passes this test, if she's kind and respectful, regardless of what she thinks I'm worth financially, then you'll know you found someone truly special." After much discussion, Joshua reluctantly agreed. We decided I would contribute a reasonable amount to the wedding. Enough to help, but not so much as to suggest hidden wealth. We would maintain the fiction that Williams Security Systems had been a moderately successful company that provided a comfortable retirement, but nothing extraordinary. "Just until after the wedding," Joshua insisted. "Then we tell her the truth, regardless of how she behaves." I agreed, though I had my private doubts about whether a person's fundamental character could change once the honeymoon phase ended. The wedding planning proceeded at a frenetic pace, with Meredith sending me frequent updates and not-so-subtle hints about additional contributions I might make. When I suggested a slightly less expensive venue that was equally beautiful, she dismissed it immediately. "We need the Rosewood Estate, Eileen," she said during one of our planning calls. "It's where all the best Hampton weddings happen. We've already had to compromise on the guest list. Can you believe we managed to get it down to 180 people when I offered to make the wedding cake? Baking had become a serious hobby of mine after retirement." She laughed as if I'd suggested serving fast food. "That's sweet, but we're going with Bellini's. They did Jennifer Lawrence's wedding cake." The weekend before the wedding, I drove to the Hamptons for the rehearsal dinner, staying at a modest bed and breakfast rather than the luxury hotel where the Calloway family and wedding party were housed. When Meredith saw where I'd booked, she pulled Joshua aside, not realizing I could hear their conversation. "Couldn't you have at least paid for her to stay somewhere nicer?" she hissed. "My parents will think it's strange that your mother is staying at that place." "My mother is comfortable where she is," Joshua replied firmly. "And I offered, but she insisted on paying her own way." "Well, at least make sure she wears something appropriate tomorrow. That blazer she had on today looked like it came from a department store clearance rack." I pretended not to have heard when they returned, but I caught Joshua watching me with troubled eyes. The wedding itself was indeed spectacular, though to my taste unnecessarily extravagant. The Rosewood Estate was transformed with thousands of white roses, crystal chandeliers hung from trees, and a dance floor constructed over the swimming pool. Meredith was stunning in a gown that I later learned cost more than many people's cars. I wore a simple but elegant blue dress that I'd owned for several years, accessorized with the pearl necklace David had given me on our 20th anniversary. It wasn't designer, but it was timeless and appropriate for the mother of the groom. When Meredith's mother, Patricia, saw me at the pre-ceremony gathering, her smile tightened noticeably. "Eileen, dear, what a practical choice," she said, gesturing to my outfit. "I always say, comfort should come first." Throughout the ceremony and reception, I was politely, but definitively, sidelined. I wasn't seated at the main table, but at one far from the center, with distant relatives of the Calloways. My suggested readings for the ceremony had been rejected as too traditional. The mother-son dance was abbreviated to make time for Meredith's elaborate father-daughter choreography. None of these slights were egregious enough to complain about, without seeming petty, yet together they painted a clear picture I was not considered an important part of this new family unit being formed. The mother of the successful, but not wealthy, groom was a supporting character, at best, an inconvenience at worst. As I watched Joshua and Meredith dance, laugh, and celebrate with their friends and her family, I wrestled with doubt. Had I made a mistake in suggesting our little experiment? Would knowing the truth about our family's wealth have resulted in a warmer welcome? And if so, wasn't that precisely the problem? Would revealing the truth after the wedding create more problems than it solved? For the first time, I truly understood the burden that great wealth could be, not in possessing it, but in never being certain if people valued you or merely what you could provide them. As the evening wound down, I found Joshua alone for a moment near the dessert table. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" I asked simply. "It's been a perfect day, Mom," he replied, but there was something in his eyes, a question, a doubt, that hadn't been there before. "Then that's all that matters," I told him, squeezing his hand. "Everything else can be figured out in time." What neither of us knew then was just how little time it would take for the truth to emerge, and how revealing that moment would be. After returning from their 2-week honeymoon in Bali, Joshua and Meredith settled into their married life in a luxury apartment in Manhattan. I had visited Joshua's previous apartment several times, a nice one-bedroom in a good neighborhood that suited a successful young attorney. The new place, however, was in an entirely different category. When I arrived for my first visit, about a month after the wedding, I was struck by the dramatic upgrade. Located in a prestigious building with a doorman and views of Central Park, the 3-bedroom apartment featured soaring ceilings, hardwood floors, and windows that flooded the space with natural light. The furnishings were clearly new and expensive. I recognized several pieces from high-end designers featured in architectural magazines. "This is quite a change from your last place," I commented as Joshua gave me a tour. "Meredith has amazing taste," he said with a slightly forced smile. "She wanted us to start our marriage in a home that reflected our future, not my bachelor past." I nodded, noting that he hadn't addressed the obvious question of affordability. Even with their combined salaries, this apartment seemed well beyond what they should reasonably spend. I wondered if Meredith's parents had contributed, or if Joshua had dipped into his savings more substantially than was prudent. Meredith emerged from the master bedroom immaculately dressed in designer casual wear despite it being a Saturday morning. "Eileen, welcome. Do you love the apartment? The waiting list for this building is usually years long, but Daddy knows the developer." "It's beautiful," I acknowledged. "Very different from what Joshua is used to." "That's the point," she laughed. "We're upgrading his whole life. You should see his new wardrobe. I practically had to force him into proper suits. Men just don't understand investment dressing." Throughout the day, I noticed subtle shifts in Meredith's behavior when Joshua was in the room versus when we were alone. With him present, she was the perfect hostess, attentive, charming, inclusive. When he stepped out to pick up lunch, however, her demeanor cooled noticeably. "I hope you don't mind eating in," she said, her tone suggesting I should indeed mind. "We usually go to the bistro down the street on Saturdays, but Josh thought you might prefer something less formal." "Eating in is perfect," I assured her. "It gives us more time to chat and get to know each other better." She nodded absently, checking her phone. After a moment, she looked up with what seemed like a practiced expression of concern. "Eileen, I hope you don't think I'm overstepping, but I've been talking to Josh about your situation." "My situation?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "You know, living alone in that big old house, managing on your own. It must be so difficult financially, especially at your age." Josh mentioned the company you and his father started provided for retirement, but with the economy these days, fixed incomes just don't stretch as far. I had to work to keep my expression neutral. "That's thoughtful of you, but I'm managing just fine." "Well, Josh and I think it might be smart for you to consider downsizing," she continued, clearly not registering my lack of enthusiasm. "Property taxes alone on a house that size must be a burden. There are some lovely retirement communities that would give you social opportunities as well." "I'm quite happy where I am," I said firmly. "The house is paid for, and I have an excellent support network of friends nearby." Meredith's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, it's ultimately your decision. I just want you to know that Josh and I are here to help if needed. Not financially, obviously," she added with a small laugh, "but with advice and support." The implication was clear. In Meredith's world, I was a potential burden to be managed, not a resource to be respected or valued. The following evening, we met Meredith's parents for dinner at an exclusive restaurant, where the maitre d' greeted Richard and Patricia Calloway by name. Throughout the meal, the conversation revolved around the Calloways' recent purchases and travels, their new vacation home in Vail, the yacht they were considering their upcoming safari in Tanzania. "We've always believed in enjoying the fruits of our success," Richard explained, swirling an expensive bourbon. "What's the point of working hard if you don't live well?" "Absolutely," Meredith agreed. "Life's too short for anything but the best." When the conversation turned to me, Patricia's questions had a distinctly condescending tone. "And how are you finding retirement, Eileen? Do you have adequate health coverage? Medicare can be so complicated." "I have excellent health insurance, thank you," I replied. "And your retirement accounts? Richard would be happy to look them over," she offered. "He has a gift for maximizing returns." "That's very kind, but my financial advisor has been with me for decades. I trust him completely." Richard leaned forward. "No offense to your advisor, but the investment world has changed dramatically. Someone of his generation might not be up on the latest opportunities. We want to make sure you're comfortable in your golden years. Dad's helped so many of our friends' parents," Meredith added. "Some were in really tight spots before he stepped in." The assumption that I was financially vulnerable was now being stated outright, not just implied. I caught Joshua's eye across the table, noting the increasing discomfort on his face. "I appreciate the concern," I said with measured calm, "but I'm quite secure." Richard chuckled in a way that suggested he didn't believe me, but was too polite to say so. "Well, the offer stands. These days, many people find their retirement funds aren't what they expected." As the evening progressed, I observed the dynamic between Joshua and Meredith with growing concern. When he spoke, she would often subtly correct or redirect him. She ordered his meal without consulting him. She referenced private jokes with her parents that excluded him. Small things, perhaps, but telling. On the taxi ride back to their apartment, Joshua was unusually quiet. "Your in-laws are quite focused on financial success," I observed carefully. "They come from nothing like you and Dad," he replied. "But they took a different lesson from the experience." "And what lesson was that?" he sighed. "That worth is measured by what you own, not who you are." And Meredith, does she share that view? Joshua stared out the window at the passing city lights. I thought I knew the answer to that. Now I'm not so sure. Back at their apartment, Meredith suggested Joshua show me the view from their rooftop terrace while she made nightcaps. Alone with my son for the first time that weekend, I took the opportunity to check in. Are you happy, Joshua? I asked directly. Most of the time, he answered after a pause. Meredith can be intense, particular about things, but she loves me, Mom. I know she does. I'm sure she does. I said, though I wasn't at all certain. But love should include respect. For you, for your family, for your values. She's trying, he insisted. This whole marriage thing is new to both of us. We're adjusting. I nodded, not wanting to push too hard. Just remember that you don't have to change who you are to be loved properly. What about our plan? He asked quietly. About telling her the truth. Let's give it a little more time, I suggested. I want to understand who she really is first. The opportunity for that understanding would come sooner than either of us expected, and in a way that would leave no room for doubt. The following week, I received an unexpected call from Meredith, inviting me to a small gathering at their apartment to celebrate their 1-month anniversary. Just a few close friends and family, she explained. Very casual. No need to bring anything. I was surprised, but pleased by the invitation. Perhaps Meredith was making an effort to include me in their new life together. I accepted immediately and arranged to drive down to the city for the weekend. When I arrived at their building on Saturday evening, the doorman informed me that the party was already underway. Indeed, as I approached their door, I could hear music and laughter from inside. Meredith answered my knock, looking stunning in a red cocktail dress that I suspected cost more than my entire wardrobe. Eileen, you made it, she exclaimed, with what seemed like genuine warmth, air-kissing both my cheeks. Come in, come in. Everyone's dying to meet Josh's mom. The small gathering turned out to be about 30 people crowded into the apartment. I recognized Richard and Patricia Calloway, but everyone else was unfamiliar. Friends of Meredith's, I assumed, given their similar style of dress and mannerisms. Joshua appeared at my side, giving me a real hug. I'm so glad you came, Mom. Can I get you something to drink? Just water for now, thank you, I replied, noting that he seemed slightly tense despite his smile. As Joshua went to fetch my drink, Meredith took my arm and guided me toward a group of women around her age. Girls, this is Josh's mom, Eileen. Eileen, these are my besties from college and work. The women greeted me with the same air kisses Meredith had demonstrated, their eyes quickly assessing my simple black pants and blouse before dismissing me as uninteresting. One asked what I did, and when I explained I was retired, the conversation swiftly moved on to topics that excluded me. Boutique fitness studios, exclusive restaurants, someone's recent plastic surgery. I circulated through the party, making polite conversation where possible, but increasingly feeling like an outsider. Joshua checked on me periodically, but as the host, he was pulled in multiple directions. I noticed that most guests were Meredith's connections, her friends, her colleagues, her parents' social circle. Few seemed to be Joshua's personal friends. After about an hour, I decided to find a quiet spot to rest for a moment. The guest bathroom was occupied, so I retreated to the small den that Joshua had shown me on my previous visit. The door was partially closed, but I could hear voices inside. Meredith, and what sounded like several of her friends. I can't believe that's his mother, a woman was saying with a laugh. Did you see her outfit? It's like she shops at a thrift store. Megan, be nice, Meredith replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't offended. Not everyone can afford designer labels. But seriously, she lives in that old house, in the suburbs, and drives a 10-year-old car, another voice chimed in. How did Josh turn out so normal? I know, right? Meredith lowered her voice, but not enough. She's sweet, but so basic. I mean, for our wedding gift, she gave us a handmade photo album. A photo album, like who does that when there's a registry at Williams-Sonoma? Didn't you say his parents had some kind of business? The first voice asked. A small tech company, back in the Stone Age, Meredith replied dismissively. Apparently they sold security software or something, but it can't have been very successful. I mean, look at her. Maybe there's a secret fortune hidden away, someone suggested with a giggle. Meredith's laugh was sharp and immediate. Right, a poor old woman living in a dated house with dated clothes is secretly loaded. That makes total sense. Well, at least you don't have to worry about an interfering mother-in-law, another friend commented. She seems pretty meek. True, Meredith agreed. And honestly, she should be grateful. Josh is supporting her more than she knows. I've been working on him to add her to our cell phone family plan, since her ancient flip phone is embarrassing. You're too generous, someone said, with exaggerated sincerity, prompting more laughter. I know, right? She should be thanking me for upgrading her son's life. I mean, before me, he wore off-the-rack suits and thought Olive Garden was fine dining. I stood, frozen outside the door, a mixture of emotions washing over me. Hurt, certainly, at hearing myself described so dismissively. Anger at the casual cruelty. But mostly a profound sadness for Joshua, who had married someone who clearly looked down on his background and family. As I was about to turn away, I heard Joshua's voice from inside the room, sharp with anger. He must have entered from the other door. Meredith, what the hell? The room fell silent instantly. Josh, how long have you been standing there? Meredith's voice had shifted to a higher innocent register. Long enough, he replied coldly. Is that really what you think of my mother? Of the way I was raised? Honey, we were just joking around. Meredith backpedaled quickly. Girl talk. You know, I didn't mean anything by it. You didn't mean anything by mocking the woman who raised me, by laughing about her giving us a thoughtful, personal wedding gift, by calling the way I dressed and the places I ate embarrassing. Josh, you're overreacting. Come on, everyone exaggerates a little when they're with friends. I couldn't bear to eavesdrop any longer. I slipped away, making my way back to the main party area, where I found Patricia Calloway holding court by the bar. When she spotted me, her expression shifted to one of manufactured concern. Eileen, dear, are you enjoying yourself? These young people's parties can be a bit overwhelming at our age. I'm fine, thank you, I replied, just taking it all in. I've been meaning to speak with you, she continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Richard and I have been discussing how we might help you. We know times must be tough on a fixed income. That's very thoughtful, but unnecessary, I said, my patience wearing thin after what I'd just overheard. Nonsense, Richard interjected, joining the conversation. We consider you family now, and we take care of our own. We'd be happy to cover some home repairs, or perhaps a nice trip. Everyone deserves a little luxury. The condescension was breathtaking. Before I could respond, Joshua appeared at my side, his face tight with barely controlled anger. Mom, can I talk to you privately for a minute? He asked. Of course, I agreed, relieved to escape the Callaways. Joshua led me to the master bedroom, closing the door behind us. "I am so sorry," he said immediately, his voice strained. What Meredith said was unforgivable. I had no idea she thought that way. "It's all right," I assured him, though we both knew it wasn't. People show their true colors eventually. "I confronted her," he continued. "She tried to laugh it off, said she was just trying to fit in with her friends. But Mom, the way she talked about you, about me before her, I don't even recognize that person." I took his hands in mine. "Joshua, I think it's time to tell the truth. Not as revenge or to teach a lesson, but because relationships can't thrive in deception. Even well-intentioned deception like ours." He nodded slowly. "I know, but not tonight, not like this. Let me talk to her first. Try to understand where this is coming from." "I agree," I said. "This isn't about the money, Joshua. It's about respect, about seeing value in people beyond what they can provide materially. If Meredith can understand that, then perhaps there's hope. And if she can't," he asked, his voice small, "then you'll have a difficult decision to make," I replied honestly. "But not tonight. Tonight, I think I should make a graceful exit from this party." Joshua insisted on calling a car service for me rather than having me take the subway back to my hotel. As I waited by the door, Meredith approached, her face a careful mask of contrition. "Leaving so soon, Eileen?" she asked. "The party's just getting started." "It's been a long day," I replied neutrally. "Thank you for including me." "Of course," she said, then lowered her voice. "Listen, about what you might have overheard. I was just being silly with my friends. You know how girls can be." "I do know how people can be," I agreed, "especially when they think no one important is listening." A flash of something, anger, worry, crossed her face before she composed herself again. "Well, we'll see you at brunch tomorrow, right? My parents are hosting at their club." "Actually, I think I'll head back to Boston early," I said. "Joshua understands." As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the gleaming high-rise where my son now lived with a woman who saw me as nothing more than a dowdy old burden. The experiment had revealed more than I had anticipated and sooner than expected. The question now was what to do with that knowledge. After a nearly sleepless night, weighing options and potential outcomes, I made a decision. It was time for complete transparency, conducted in a way that would leave no room for misinterpretation or manipulation. I reached for my phone and made 2 calls. First to Joshua, then to Andrew Morgan, my attorney and financial advisor for the past 30 years. The following morning, I met Joshua for coffee at a quiet cafe near my hotel. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he'd slept as poorly as I had. "I couldn't stay there after what happened," he admitted, stirring his untouched coffee. "I spent the night at a hotel." "How did Meredith react when you left?" I asked. "She was furious. Said I was overreacting, being dramatic, embarrassing her in front of her friends." He shook his head. "Mom, I don't understand how I could have misjudged someone so completely. We see what we want to see in the people we love," I said gently. "And Meredith was careful to show you her best self while you were dating." I told her we need to have a serious conversation about the future of our marriage, he continued. That her behavior toward you and her attitude about my background aren't acceptable to me. "And what did she say to that?" "That I'm being ungrateful after everything her family has done for us, including contributing to the wedding and helping with the apartment down payment." He looked up, his expression troubled. "I didn't know they helped with the apartment, Mom. She told me she'd been saving for years." This new information was concerning, but not surprising. It suggested Meredith had been concealing financial arrangements from Joshua, creating situations that would make him increasingly dependent on her family. "Joshua, I've been thinking about our next steps," I said. "I believe it's time to be completely transparent about our family's financial situation, not as a gotcha moment, but as a reset, a chance for everyone to interact without hidden agendas or misconceptions." "I agree," he replied, "but I'm worried about how Meredith will react. If she was only interested in me because she thought I came from money, finding out I'm actually wealthier than she imagined might make things worse, not better." "That's a valid concern," I acknowledged. "But this isn't just about money. It's about truth and trust. Your marriage started with a deception, albeit a well-intentioned one. It can't continue that way. So what do you suggest?" "I've arranged a meeting at Williams Security Systems headquarters tomorrow morning," I explained. "I'd like you to bring Meredith and her parents if possible. Tell them it's about my estate planning if you need a reason. Andrew Morgan will be there as well." Joshua nodded slowly. A neutral ground for a difficult conversation. "I'll make it happen. Just one more thing," I added. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that this isn't about punishing Meredith or her family. It's about clarity and honesty. What you do with that clarity afterward is entirely your decision." "I understand," he said. "But Mom, I want you to know that I'm ashamed of myself for not standing up for you sooner, for letting Meredith's comments slide, for prioritizing peace over respect." "We all make mistakes, Joshua," I assured him. "The measure of character is what we do once we recognize them." When I returned to my hotel room, I had a voice message waiting from Richard Calloway. His tone was jovial, but with an undercurrent of condescension. "Eileen, Richard here. Joshua mentioned you want to meet about some estate planning matters. As I've told you, I'm happy to advise. These things can be complex for lay people, especially at your age. Patricia and I will clear our schedules. Looking forward to helping you get your affairs in order." The assumption that I needed his financial expertise was exactly what I had come to expect from the Callaways. Tomorrow would be enlightening for everyone. The next morning, I arrived early at the Williams Security Systems headquarters in downtown Manhattan. The sleek, 32-story building bore our name across the top, a detail I had specifically asked Joshua not to mention to Meredith or her parents when arranging the meeting. Andrew Morgan was waiting for me in the private executive elevator. "Are you sure about this, Eileen?" he asked as we ascended to the top floor. "There are less dramatic ways to disclose your financial situation." "I'm not looking for drama, Andrew," I assured him. "But after what happened at that party, I want there to be absolutely no ambiguity about where things stand." The executive conference room had been prepared according to my instructions. Simple but elegant refreshments, copies of the most recent financial statements, and a brief presentation about the company's history and current valuation. At precisely 10 o'clock, my assistant informed me that Joshua had arrived with Meredith and her parents. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and nodded to Andrew. "Show them in," I said, standing to greet our guests. Joshua entered first, giving me a quick, supportive hug. Meredith followed her expression, a mixture of annoyance and confusion. Richard and Patricia Calloway came last, looking around the impressive conference room with visible surprise. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I know this seems mysterious, but I assure you, everything will make sense shortly." "Eileen, what is this place?" Patricia asked, her eyes darting from the expensive artwork to the sweeping views of the city. "Joshua said something about estate planning, But this doesn't look like a lawyer's office. You're right, it's not. I agreed. This is the headquarters of Williams Security Systems. The company you and Josh's father started, Richard clarified, clearly reassessing his previous assumptions. I didn't realize it was still in operation at this scale. It is indeed, I confirmed. In fact, WSS has grown considerably since its early days. Andrew, would you mind giving our guests an overview? Andrew Morgan stepped forward, his manner professionally crisp. Williams Security Systems was founded by David and Eileen Williams in 1985. What began as a two-person operation has grown into one of the world's leading cybersecurity firms, with over 5,000 employees globally and annual revenue exceeding $500 million. I watched as this information registered on the faces of Meredith and her parents. Surprise, certainly, but also confusion as they tried to reconcile this with their perception of me as a financially struggling widow. Following David Williams' passing 5 years ago, Andrew continued. Eileen stepped back from day-to-day operations, but remains chairwoman of the board and majority shareholder. The company's current market valuation is approximately $3 billion. Richard Calloway's mouth literally fell open. $3 billion, he repeated, his voice strangled. That's the corporate valuation, I clarified. My personal net worth, including my stake in the company, various investments and real estate holdings, is approximately $75 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Meredith had gone pale, her perfectly manicured hand clutching the edge of the conference table. Patricia looked as though she might faint. Richard's expression had transformed from confusion to a complicated mixture of shock and calculation. I don't understand, Meredith finally said, her voice small. If you're this wealthy, why do you live in that old house, drive that old car, wear those clothes? She gestured vaguely at my simple but well-tailored pantsuit. Because I value different things than you do, Meredith, I replied calmly. That old house is where I built a life with the man I loved and raised a son I'm immensely proud of. That old car is reliable, comfortable, and has sentimental value. And these clothes are chosen for quality and comfort, not to impress others. But why keep it a secret? Patricia interjected, clearly struggling to process this revelation. Why let everyone think you were less fortunate? I never claimed to be poor, I pointed out. I simply didn't flaunt my wealth. There's a difference. But you're right that recently I specifically chose not to correct your assumptions about my financial status. You were testing me. Meredith realized, her eyes narrowing as she turned to Joshua. Both of you were. Not initially, Joshua replied, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. When we got engaged, Mom and I realized you had certain expectations about my family's finances. We decided to let those assumptions stand until after the wedding. We wanted to make sure that I wasn't marrying you for money. Meredith finished, her voice hardening. You didn't trust me. Can you blame us? Joshua asked quietly. Given what you said about my mother at the party, about how you upgraded my life, Richard Calloway, ever the businessman, was already recovering from his shock. Eileen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Whatever Meredith might have said in a moment of indiscretion, we've always valued Joshua for himself, not his potential inheritance. I'm sure that's true, I said, though I wasn't sure at all. But this meeting isn't about accusations. It's about transparency. I wanted all of us to move forward with complete clarity about who I am and what I've built. So this is revenge, Meredith said bitterly, for what you overheard at the party. No, Meredith, this is reality, I corrected her. The fact that you see truth as punishment says more about your perspective than mine. I stood and walked to the window, gathering my thoughts before turning back to face them. I grew up with very little. So did David. When we built this company, we made a conscious decision not to let wealth change our core values. Modesty, hard work, judging people by their character, not their bank accounts. I looked directly at Meredith. When you mocked me for living in that old house and driving that old car, you revealed that we have fundamentally different values. When you laughed about the photo album I spent weeks creating for you and Joshua, you showed that you measure worth in dollars, not thoughtfulness or time. It was just talk, Meredith protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Everyone vents to their friends sometimes. True, I acknowledged. But the content of that venting reveals what's in our hearts. If Joshua had overheard me speaking disparagingly about you to my friends, wouldn't you consider that significant? Meredith had no response to this. Richard, however, was already shifting into damage control mode. Eileen, we all regret any misunderstandings. But now that everything's in the open, we can start fresh. I'm sure we have many business interests in common. Perhaps we could discuss potential collaborations between my development company and Williams Security. In this digital age, real estate security is increasingly important. The shamelessness of his pivot from condescension to networking was almost impressive. That would be a discussion for our CEO, I replied coolly. I no longer handle business development. Patricia was looking at me with new eyes, calculating, assessing. Eileen, you've built something truly remarkable. We should get together for lunch soon, just us girls. I'd love to hear more about your journey as a female entrepreneur. The same woman who had patronizingly offered to help me understand Medicare was now angling for a mentorship relationship. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so transparent. I appreciate the invitation, I said neutrally, but my schedule is quite full with the David Williams Foundation work. Joshua had been watching this exchange with growing discomfort. I think we've covered the essential information, he said firmly. Mom, thank you for your honesty. Meredith, we should probably head home and talk privately. As the meeting broke up, Meredith approached me while Joshua was speaking with Andrew. I want you to know I really do love your son, she said quietly. This isn't just about money for me. I studied her face, trying to gauge her sincerity. I hope that's true, Meredith, for both your sakes. But love includes respect for your partner and for the people they care about. I haven't felt much of that from you. I can do better, she insisted. Now that I understand, things will be different. That's the problem, I replied gently. Understanding that I'm wealthy shouldn't change how you treat me. Respect isn't something you offer conditionally, based on someone's financial status. As they left, Joshua hung back for a moment. That went about as well as could be expected, he said with a grimace. What will you do now? I asked. Have a very long conversation with my wife, he replied, and then make some difficult decisions. But Mom, whatever happens, thank you for showing me the truth. Not just about Meredith, but about the importance of authenticity. I watched him go, my heart heavy with the knowledge that his young marriage faced a serious test. Yet I also felt a sense of relief that the deception was over. Whatever happened next would at least be based on truth, not assumptions or pretense. What I didn't yet realize was how profoundly this revelation would transform Not just Joshua and Meredith's relationship, but my own understanding of Wealth family and the complex interplay between them. The 6 months following the revelation at Williams Security Systems headquarters were a period of significant change and reflection for everyone involved. After the initial shock wore off, each of us had to reckon with the truths that had been exposed, not just about my financial status, but about our own values and assumptions. Joshua and Meredith's marriage entered a crisis phase almost immediately. For 2 weeks after the meeting, Joshua stayed in a hotel, needing space to process everything that had happened. During that time, he and I spoke daily, our conversations deeper and more honest than they had been in years. I keep asking myself what I really know about Meredith, he confided during one of these calls. If I misread her character so completely, what does that say about my judgment? It says you saw the best in someone you loved, I told him. That's not a character flaw, Joshua. It's a sign of an open heart. But at what point does an open heart become willful blindness? He countered. Looking back, there were so many signs I ignored. The constant focus on appearances, the dismissive comments about people she considered beneath her social class, the way she changed when her friends were around. What does she say now that everything's out in the open? I asked. She's apologetic, of course, he said with a sigh. Says she was just trying to fit in with her friends, that it wasn't her real self. Claims she fell in love with me before she knew anything about my background, which is probably true. But Mom, even if she didn't marry me for money, she certainly seems to value status and wealth above almost everything else. People can change, Joshua, I reminded him. The question is whether she wants to. After 3 weeks of separation, Joshua agreed to move back home and attempt marriage counseling with Meredith. I kept my distance during this period, not wanting to complicate an already difficult situation. Occasionally, Joshua would update me on their progress, but I was careful not to offer unsolicited opinions. About 2 months after the revelation, I received an unexpected call from Meredith, asking if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. Curious, but cautious, I agreed. We met at a modest cafe in a neighborhood far from Meredith's usual upscale haunts. She arrived without the designer accessories and perfectly styled hair I'd grown accustomed to seeing. Instead, she wore simple jeans, a sweater, and minimal makeup. The change was striking. Thank you for meeting me, she began, her usual confidence notably subdued. I've been wanting to talk to you one-on-one, but I wasn't sure you'd be willing. I'm always open to honest conversation, I assured her. That's what I need to talk about. Honesty. She took a deep breath. I've been doing a lot of thinking since finding out about your wealth. At first, I was angry, felt like I'd been tricked. But the more I reflected on it, the more I realized that my reaction said everything about me and nothing about you. I nodded, encouraging her to continue. The things I said about you at that party, she winced at the memory. They were cruel and shallow. I can make excuses. That I was trying to fit in, that I was raised to value certain things, that my parents put pressure on me. But the truth is, I was wrong. Fundamentally wrong in how I judged you and what I valued. What changed your perspective? I asked, genuinely curious. Therapy partly, she admitted. Both with Joshua and on my own, but also watching how you've handled everything. You never gloated or tried to make me feel small, even when you had every reason to. You just stood in your truth with dignity. She looked down at her coffee cup. I've lived my entire life believing that worth comes from what you own and how others perceive you. My parents drilled that into me from childhood. Success meant the right address, the right clothes, the right connections. When I saw your simple home and car, I made assumptions about your worth as a person. That was incredibly wrong of me. We're all shaped by our upbringing, I acknowledged. David and I made a conscious choice to raise Joshua with different values than those I hear you describing. And it shows, she said quietly. Joshua is the most genuinely good person I've ever met. He cares about people, not possessions. He values substance over style. I fell in love with those qualities, even while part of me was trying to change them. We talked for over 2 hours that afternoon. Meredith shared stories about growing up with Richard and Patricia, how family conversations revolved around acquisitions and status symbols, how she learned early that her parents' approval was tied to achievements that enhanced the family's social standing. I'm not saying this to excuse my behavior, she clarified, just to explain that I'm trying to unlearn some deeply ingrained patterns. And how is that process going? I asked. It's hard, she admitted. Sometimes I catch myself making judgments based on someone's appearance or possessions, and I have to consciously redirect my thinking. But I'm committed to change, not just for Joshua or for our marriage, but for myself. I don't want to be the person I heard in those party comments. Before we parted, Meredith made a surprising request. Would you be willing to let me volunteer with your foundation, not in any visible role? I know I haven't earned that, but maybe behind the scenes, I want to learn more about the work you do and develop a better understanding of what actually matters. Her request seemed sincere, and I saw it as an opportunity to either witness genuine growth or confirm my lingering doubts. I think that could be arranged, I told her. The foundation always needs help with grant application reviews and event planning. The following week, Meredith began volunteering at the David Williams Foundation 2 afternoons a week. Our program director reported that she worked diligently without complaint, even on menial tasks like organizing donor mailings and updating contact databases. More importantly, she listened during staff meetings, absorbing the passionate discussions about educational access and technological equity that drove our mission. Meanwhile, Joshua and Meredith continued their counseling, working through the trust issues that had emerged. Joshua remained cautiously optimistic but realistic. She's really trying, Mom, he told me after they'd been in therapy for 3 months. Not just with you, but with everything. She's reconnecting with old friends she drifted away from because they weren't successful enough. She's having some difficult conversations with her parents about their values. It's not easy for her. And what about your relationship? I asked. Can you move past what happened? We're taking it day by day, he said honestly. Some days are better than others, but I believe in giving people the chance to grow and change. Dad would have done the same. He was right about that. David had always believed in second chances, in the capacity for people to evolve beyond their past mistakes. It was one of the many things I had loved about him. 4 months after the revelation, I invited Joshua and Meredith to my home for dinner. The first time Meredith had visited since everything had come to light. I watched with interest as she entered the living room, noting how her eyes now took in the space differently. Your home is so warm, she commented, running her hand along the bookshelf David had built decades ago. I never really saw that before. I was too busy noticing what it wasn't, instead of appreciating what it is. Thank you, I replied. That means a lot, especially coming from someone with your eye for design. Throughout dinner, Meredith was different, more present, more genuine in her interactions. She asked thoughtful questions about my early days with David, about the challenges we faced building the company, about the values that guided our decisions. She listened without the barely concealed impatience I'd observed in the past. "I've been thinking a lot about your choices," she said as we shared dessert. "Living modestly, despite your wealth, focusing on what you can give rather than what you can get. It's so different from how I was raised, but I can see the wisdom in it now." "It wasn't always easy," I admitted. "There were times David and I questioned our approach, especially when Joshua was a teenager, and all his friends had the latest gadgets or trendy clothes. But we believed that building character was more important than accumulating status symbols." "I wish I'd understood that sooner," she said with genuine regret. "I might have appreciated Joshua's background instead of trying to upgrade him." After dinner, while Joshua helped me with the dishes, Meredith wandered into David's study, the room where I kept photographs and mementos of our life together. When we joined her, she was looking at a framed picture of David and me standing proudly in front of our first real office building. Our clothes rumpled our faces, exhausted but triumphant. "You really built something extraordinary together," she said softly. "Not just the company, but a life with meaning." "We did," I agreed. "And it was the meaning that mattered most to us, not the money. The money was just a byproduct of creating something valuable for others." As they were leaving that evening, Meredith hugged me. Not the artificial air kiss she'd always offered before, but a genuine embrace. "Thank you for giving me another chance," she whispered. "I won't waste it." I wanted to believe her, and the evidence suggested she was sincere in her efforts to change. But only time would tell if these changes were permanent or merely a reaction to the dramatic shift in circumstances. 5 months after the revelation, Joshua called with news that suggested Meredith's transformation was indeed genuine. She had approached him about downsizing from their luxury apartment to something more reasonable. She said, "We're spending too much on status and not enough on substance," he reported with pleased surprise. "She wants to redirect some of our income to charitable giving and saving for the future." "That's a significant change," I observed. "How did her parents react?" "Not well," he admitted. "Richard and Patricia see it as a step backward. They've been less involved in our lives since everything happened, especially after Meredith started pushing back against their materialistic values." The mention of the Callaways reminded me that I hadn't heard from them directly since the meeting at WSS headquarters. According to Joshua, they had initially been furious about what they perceived as deliberate humiliation, then had attempted to leverage their new knowledge of my wealth to advance Richard's business interests. When those efforts failed, they retreated into cold civility, interacting with Joshua and Meredith only at major holidays and family obligations. "Their relationship with Meredith is strained," Joshua explained. "They don't understand or approve of the changes she's making. They think I've brainwashed her." "And how does she handle that pressure?" I asked. "Better than I expected," he replied. "She told them that she's finally thinking for herself instead of trying to meet their expectations." It was a difficult conversation, but I was proud of her for standing her ground. 6 months to the day after the revelation, the David Williams Foundation held its annual fundraising gala. As chairwoman, I was expected to give a speech highlighting our accomplishments and future goals. In previous years, I had kept a low profile at these events, preferring to let our executive director take the spotlight. But this year felt different. Joshua and Meredith attended the gala, as did many of our company executives, board members, and major donors. What no one expected was that I would use this public platform to announce a significant change in my own approach to wealth and philanthropy. For decades, my late husband David and I built our company with two guiding principles. I told the assembled guests, first, create technology that genuinely protects people. Second, never forget that our success came with responsibility to give back. Tonight, I'm expanding on that second principle. I announced my decision to transfer majority control of Williams Security Systems to an employee ownership trust, retaining only a small personal stake. The bulk of my wealth would be directed to the foundation, with specific provisions for Joshua and any future grandchildren that would provide them security without excessive luxury. True wealth isn't measured in bank balances, I concluded. It's measured in the positive impact we have on others, the relationships we build, and the values we pass down to future generations. After the speech, Meredith found me in a quiet corner of the ballroom, her eyes bright with emotion. "That was incredible," she said. "A year ago, I wouldn't have understood your decision at all. I would have thought you were crazy to give away so much." "And now?" I asked. "Now I see that you're not giving away anything important," she replied thoughtfully. "You're redirecting resources to create more meaning, more positive change. You're keeping what matters: purpose, legacy, family, and letting go of what doesn't." "That's exactly right." I agreed, genuinely impressed by her insight. "I have something to tell you," she said, suddenly nervous. "Joshua doesn't even know yet, but I wanted you to be the first to hear." She took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother." Joy flooded through me at this unexpected news. "Oh, Meredith, that's wonderful. I found out yesterday," she continued, "and all I could think about was what kind of mother I want to be, what values I want to pass on to my child." She looked at me intently. "I want to be more like you. I want to teach my child that character matters more than possessions, that respect is earned through actions, not acquired through wealth." As I embraced my daughter-in-law, truly embraced her, not as an obligation, but as family, I reflected on the remarkable journey we had all undertaken. What had begun as a simple test of character had evolved into a profound reassessment of values that touched all our lives. Later that evening, as Joshua, Meredith, and I shared a quiet moment away from the gala festivities, Joshua raised his water glass in a toast. "To honesty," he said, "sometimes painful, but always necessary." "And to growth," Meredith added, "the kind that matters." "To family," I concluded, "in all its complex, imperfect glory." We clinked glasses, three people who had traveled a difficult road together and emerged stronger for the journey. The secret of my 75 million had been revealed, but the true revelation had nothing to do with money. It was about something far more valuable: the discovery that authentic respect, once earned, is worth more than any fortune. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that tested someone's true character? Or perhaps you've been on the receiving end of a reality check that changed your perspective. Share your experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you navigated those challenging moments in your own relationships. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories about family values and the unexpected lessons life teaches us. And if you know someone who might benefit from this message about authentic respect and true worth, share this video with them. Sometimes the stories that touch us most are the ones that help us see ourselves more clearly. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, your true value has nothing to do with your bank account and everything to do with how you treat others. I hope you'll carry that truth with you no matter where life takes you next.